Okay, thanks to everyone who's joined this session hosted by the YouthMappers Validation Hub. Before I pass it off to the Validation Hub, I just want to give a quick overview of YouthMappers for anyone here that isn't familiar with the organization. So I'm Derek Harney-Nuttleman. I'm YouthMappers Communications Specialist. And essentially, YouthMappers is an international community of university student-led chapters who focus on using open geospatial data to address development challenges. So you can see here a group of YouthMappers from, I believe, the University of Cape Coast pictured. So YouthMappers founding partners are from Texas Tech University, George Washington University, West Virginia University, and the founding funder of YouthMappers is the United States Agency for International Development, and the lead fiscal administrative partner is Arizona State University. So in order to join the network of 243 chapters across 55 countries, you can visit youthmappers.org and specifically go to the Participate tab. I would like to share with you all the motto of YouthMappers, which is we don't just build mappers. We don't just build maps, we build mappers. And that's especially important for today because today is about building your mapping skills by learning about JOSM and also learning about validation. So you learn the entire cycle process of mapping. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Richard Hinton, the Hub manager, to pass it off to all of the Hub members. So thanks to everyone who's joining today. Richard, it's breaking in and out. Okay, let's pass it off to each of the Hub members then, and maybe your connection will get stronger as we're talking. So first off, I'd like to introduce Noelle, if you'll give an introduction.
Hi everyone, I'm Noelle Dwyer. I'm a junior at George Washington University studying engineering and GIS, and I've joined the Hub in last October.
And now let's pass it off to Kate.
Hi, I'm Kate O'Byrne. I'm a senior at George Washington University. I'm majoring in environmental studies and I'm minoring in GIS and sustainability. I joined the Hub in June 2020.
And now to Natalie.
Hi everyone, my name is Natalie. I'm also a senior at the George Washington University. I'm double majoring in international affairs and geography and minoring in GIS, and I joined the Hub back in this past summer, so in June.
And now to Ben.
Good morning or afternoon or evening, everyone. My name is Ben Heitloff. I'm a senior at George Washington University studying international affairs and GIS, and I joined the Hub back in October 2020.
And finally, Amy.
Hi everyone, my name is Amy and I'm also a senior at George Washington and I study international affairs and geography, minoring in GIS. And I also joined the Hub in the fall along with a few others.
And Richard, is your connection better?
I can try. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi, I just turned my video off to save some bandwidth. And good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Richard Hinton. I'm with George Washington University and I manage the Validation Hub. And I've been lucky enough to be with YouthMappers since its inception. One other point I'd like to make is that Natalie, Amy, and Noelle currently sit on the board of our YouthMappers chapter, HMS, the Humanitarian Mapping Society at George Washington University. So thanks for being here. We're glad to have you here. I'm looking forward to this event. And with that, I'll be quiet.
Thanks so much to everyone introducing yourself. And just to give a quick run through for those who joined at the very start, that have joined after we started, we will actually, this is the order of presentations. So we went over YouthMappers a little bit, and now we've done introductions. Then Noelle is going to give the validation purpose, and then the YouthMappers Validation Hub is going to take it away to explain their role and the resources that YouthMappers can use. We'll do a question and answer, and then we will have a Mapathon and JOSM training. So now I will pass it over to you, Noelle, and I'll put back the slides.
Thanks, Sarah. So the goal of validation is to verify the quality of the data contributed to OpenStreetMap by users while encouraging them to keep improving their mapping and essentially building mappers. So in order to do this, our process is to review areas that have been mapped by users, ensure that the tasks are complete, that they are tagged accurately according to the project guidelines, and then to also provide some constructive, encouraging feedback to mappers to keep them coming back and making better and better edits every single time. So we want to make sure that we're thanking them for mapping and encouraging them so we can get as many mappers as possible that are building their experience. We use a special tool to do validation called JOSM, which is JavaOpenStreetMap, because it streamlines the geometry and tagging functions when we're doing validation work and has very helpful validation plugins to quickly spot errors and to cycle through features in a task so that we can quickly move through like every single building at a time and then move roads and things like that just to make sure that everything is looking good. So why is validation important? It's very important to have quality edits and ensure that the data is complete and correct. It's good to have two back-to-back people looking at the same set of data to make sure that there's nothing missed. It also has to do with data usability. So map data cannot be used for humanitarian purposes until it has been validated. Because we have so many users on OpenStreetMap, which is an amazing thing, we don't know which levels they are. And so it's great to always have people of all levels mapping a task and then a validator come in who has been an intermediate to an advanced mapper to just look over those edits, make sure they look good, and then to pass it on for humanitarian work. There's also an increasingly large number of projects on the Hot Tasking Manager and all platforms that we use to validate. And that just makes validation more important every single day as we have more and more mappers coming to contribute and less validators. So it's really important to have validation to make sure this data is usable and that it is of quality.
So here at the Validation Hub, we are a group of experienced student mappers. Our primary focus is to validate OSM contributors' work and guarantee that all Youth Mappers projects have the highest quality data. We can do this through documentation, training, and support. And the Hub works to strengthen the competence and skills of mappers and validators from the OSM community and volunteers from Youth Mappers chapters worldwide. By working together, we hope to foster inclusive communities that helps one another and puts quality effort into supporting Youth Mappers projects. We access OSM data through humanitarian OpenStreetMap Team's Tasking Manager, a tool used to divide mapping projects into smaller tasks so multiple users can map and validate at the same time. Another primary tool we use is JOSM, which Noelle mentioned earlier. We use this software to make sure we adhere to OSM's established guidelines on tracing and tagging. The Hub strives to inform and encourage youth mappers to advance their mapping techniques and image interpretation abilities by learning to validate using these advanced editing tools.
All right, and so at Youth Mappers, we do have several resource guides to help you along the way. And so these are all hyperlinked. I'm going to share my screen because they are also on our website. And so let me just pull that up really quickly here. Hopefully everyone sees this. Can someone just chime in really quick because it disappeared from my screen, so I don't know.
Yeah,
okay,
that's
so
good.
Okay, so we're really just the main Youth Mappers website. So I'll just click the logo up here. So and so as Professor Hinton was saying earlier, you can go to participate and learn how to get more involved. But for now, we're going to go into the projects tab down to the validation hub. And once we click that, there's a little bit more about what we do, just in case you missed it. In the first part, I want to go back. But then down at the bottom here, after our bio, we do have our list of resources. So if we go to the first one, for example, Google Doc, which should be available to you no matter what, like with or without account. And so this just goes down sort of in the individual, what tasks does validating mean? So like what does the workflow look like? So familiarizing yourself with project instructions, looking for tools, things like this. And then down here, we also have a good just generalized workflow of how, at what point should you go and fix the edits versus leaving a comment and helping the community grow. If we go back to here, the main site, also is a JOSM training document. So if you're not too familiar with JOSM and want to get more practice in after our Mapathon has ended this morning or afternoon, you can go in here and learn more about how to get involved with JOSM and sort of the specific editing guidelines. There's also keyboard shortcuts as well, just because there is a little bit of a learning curve. Also installing JOSM, task manager creation form, also validation messages. So after we do validate, we always think it's important to comment on what we've changed and to help encourage the community. And so here, just some on the document, just some example suggestions. And so we always want to make sure that we're encouraging people and that there are some suggestions that we want to make, just making sure that we phrase them in a way that encourages people and not just telling them what they're doing wrong, telling them how to improve, things like that. And so, like I said before, we can find all this on the YouthMappers page under projects, the Validation Hub. So even after the session's over, you can find them yourself and get access to them at any time you want. So I will stop sharing now and let you all go back to the normal PowerPoint.
And now we are to the point of the presentation for questions. Thank you all so much to all of the Validation Hub members who gave an overview of validation and then also the Hub process. Yes, Natalie just put the link to the website section in the chat. And there's also some additional resources available on the resource library. So does anyone have any questions for the Hub right now? You can put them in the chat. And you also have the ability to unmute yourself and you can just say them if anyone has any questions.
One thing I'll add here is that the documentation that you just saw that Ben was showing us, those are the documentation that we developed when we first stood up the hub, and they were based on sort of established guidelines for validation that the missing maps primarily in the American Red Cross had sort of set up and have adopted and has been adopted by HOT and other organizations. So our workflow is sort of based around that existing structure. As well, these documents that you have access to, as new tools come online, new plugins, and new sort of protocols come into place, we will update those documents to try and reflect the latest practices in validation as sort of validation sort of world grows and we sort of learn more and we're able to do more. So just so you know, that those documents are not static, but they will be updated as sort of the evolution of validation sort of continues.
So I have a fun question to start off. I was wondering if anyone could share the wildest or craziest edit that they've corrected or maybe seen that someone's added. So a really fun location. And I did not let them know that I was going to ask this question ahead of time. So I'll let them think on that for a minute. Well, if you have any questions for the Validation Hub, go ahead and put those in the chat. Does anyone want to share?
This isn't that crazy, but just one of the, like, I guess, worst tasks that I've seen, like when you open it up and there were just like 5 buildings on top of one another. So it had been mapped like 5 times over. So I guess just going through and deleting the duplicated buildings, but that was like an extreme case. Usually there's only a couple. So yeah, that's like one that stands out to me.
Yeah, mine is it's not that crazy, but there was a task that I was working on once where it used like, I think 7 different offsets. It had been mapped with like 7 different ones. And so like trying to get them all on the same one was just like so difficult because like some things were mapped to this side and then like others were skewed that way. And like, that was a lot.
Noelle, maybe for the new mappers, can you explain what you mean by offsets? I'm assuming you're meaning the imagery.
Yes. So, so the offset is just like when you're looking at satellite imagery where you see like a road or a feature would be different depending on what imagery you're using. So like Bing has a different offset than Maxar. So when you're mapping in that, like the buildings might be a little off if you map them in Bing and then you're looking at them in Maxar. So what I mean by the like 7 different offsets is that people had come in and mapped with either Maxar, some had mapped with Bing, some had mapped with like, I don't even know, but, or like they had mapped over a series of years to where the imagery had changed over the years. And it was just like all the roads were a little bit off from where you could see them on the imagery, and the buildings were like a little bit off from where you could see them like on the previous or newer version of the imagery.
Thanks for sharing, Noelle. And Natalie, we've got one more question in the chat, but did you have something you wanted to share?
No, I forgot.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry.
Okay, so we've got a question in the chat. What is your favorite shortcut in JOSM? And if you've used any of the different paint styles in JOSM?
I can answer this one though. My favorite plugin is definitely the Select Non-Orthogonal Buildings tool, because a lot of times you end up with tasks where a lot of the buildings haven't been squared and they should have been squared. And this basically selects all of those buildings for you. And assuming none of them are like too crazy and should have just never been squared in the first place, you can just press the Q key and it'll square them all. I've never used the different paint styles in JOSM. I'll have to look into that though.
I've used the different paint styles. I've used Potlatch, and then the other one, which I feel like is just called Paint Styles, but I can't remember at this point. But I prefer to use the like the first Paint Styles one for most of the time, because Potlatch makes all buildings red over top. It puts like a little thing there, so it's harder to tell if there's actually something under the edit than like, because sometimes like it'll look very convincing and then you like move it over and it was just the tint of Potlatch. But my favorite plugin, I think, has to be the Mark Scene tool or the to-do list, because it just like, you can just like select every single building in a whole task and add it to a list, and then just cycle through looking at every single one. And then Mark Scene lets you set your window of what you're looking at, and then you can like go through and see what you've already looked at, so you're not looking at the same part of the task like over and over again and not realizing.
Also with paint styles, I think maybe the one Noelle was talking about is Missing Maps, or maybe it's different, but it's one that highlights all buildings that aren't tagged as building equals yes. So you can go in and check those out and see if that was a mistake or not. And it also just highlights some common errors. So it's like really easy to just visually go through and check. So that's something that's really helpful that they developed.
I think it might be that one, yeah. And it also shows like glued nodes together where like people have accidentally glued buildings, which is really helpful.
So we have another question in the chat from Rory. Does the alien help with validation as well?
100% he helps. He's a little deflated now, and his name was Geoid. So any of the geographers in the room will get that. But he's unfortunately a little deflated. these days, but he was totally helping when he could.
Okay, again, I just want to do another call for questions. They can be fun questions like we've been asking, or they can be more serious if you want to put the questions in the chat, or you can unmute yourself. We'll just wait a few minutes for folks to add some more questions, to share, to ask any questions. Okay, so hearing no questions. Oh, there we go. We got one. See, that always happens. Okay, so yes, the recording of the meeting will be posted on our YouTube channel, and we'll also email all the folks who did not get the recording of the meeting. So that'll be after today that you all will receive the recording. And you can also go to the website, and there's a intro already of YouthMappers Validation Hub there. That's about 10 minutes long. So you can learn more about the resources and hear directly from the people that are here, or you can ask them questions right now. So seeing no other questions, feel free to share questions throughout the session. Right now, I'm going to open up the breakout room for the Mapathon. So what will happen, I hope everyone got that notification. What will happen now is that those who want to stay in the JOSM room, so JavaOpenStreetMap training, Natalie and Amy are going to take over that room. And then for the Mapathon room, Ben and Kate are going to go in there, and you all will be mapping for rural electrification in Nigeria. So again, I hope everyone has that option to join the breakout room. If you don't, please let me know.
Hi guys, thanks for sticking around in the main room. Hopefully some of you are already a little bit familiar with JOSM, but if not, I hope you guys are excited to learn. So I guess we'll get started and kick things off. You want to go to the next slide? Oh, okay. So as was mentioned earlier by Noelle and Kate, JOSM, or JavaOpenStreetMap, is an editor that allows for some more advanced edits than the typical ID editor that you see in the normal tasking manager. So one key thing about JOSM is that it allows for offline editing. So it's very similar function-wise to the tasking manager that is available. I mean, the ID editor that's available within the tasking manager, but the way JOSM works is it will download imagery and change sets from the tasking manager, and then you'll perform the edits within the JavaOpenStreetMap app that you have downloaded on your personal computer, and then you will upload them again after you've finished editing and validating, or validating all the features. So as it kind of says here, edits are checked out of OSM, and then they're brought into JOSM, and then they're pushed back in afterwards. And there's some nice little like screen captures on the screen that kind of show what some JOSM editing looks like. They were moving before, I don't know why they stopped, but yeah, it's definitely, if you're looking to advance a little more with your OpenStreetMap editing, it's definitely a more advanced way to do it, because as you can see on the screen, the right side is JOSM, the left side is ID editor, and it's one example is the building tool, which makes drawing buildings so much faster. So I guess we can go to the next slide. All right, so hopefully before the event, you all downloaded JOSM onto your computer. If you haven't, that unfortunately does take a while. So we don't really have, I don't think we really have the time now to wait for you guys to download it. However, we can just kind of like walk you through what you're gonna need to do once it is downloaded. But if you have downloaded JOSM and you have not yet like used it at all, this is going to be the steps that are for you. So first, you're going to want to go into, oh yeah, Amy also sent the download link. So if you do need to download, definitely feel free to do it now and have a good run in the background of Zoom if your bandwidth allows. So first, you're going to need to authorize your OpenStreetMap account. So make sure you know your login info because you're going to need that. So as you can kind of see on the screen with the screen capture, you're going to open up JOSM, go into the top, click edit preferences, or if you're on a Mac, I believe it's slightly different. It is if you click on like the button, I think next to JOSM, you scroll down and you can click the preferences button and you'll go to the connection setting. Once you're in preferences, it should look kind of like that. I don't know if you guys can see it now behind the screen capture, but like a little red box, or not red box, the globe. And you'll click on that and it'll prompt you to authorize now. And then you can enter your OpenStreetMap username and password, click authorize now, and then click accept access token. And make sure you're keeping the preferences window open. I don't know if anyone wants me to do it on my computer, I can and share my screen, or if everyone kind of understands from the instructions.
And feel free to unmute yourself and let us know if you're having issues during any part of this. We can always stop and share our screen.
Okay, I guess seeing none, we'll continue. And yeah, like Amy said, don't forget you can just unmute yourself. So once you've done that, you're gonna stay in the preferences window and go to set up remote control. So there's a little setting called remote control settings. If you scroll down, it literally looks like a little like remote. I think it doesn't. Yeah, it looks like a weird little remote. It looks a little different in the newer version, but essentially it looks like a little box with little like radio things on top. So you're gonna open that up, you're gonna check enable remote control, which should be up top right there, where that they just clicked in there, and then you're gonna click OK, and you're gonna keep your preferences window open as we move on to the next step. Oh, okay, that was not a question. Oops, can we go back? Yeah, so we can go to the next slide. So before mapping, it's to your advantage to download some of the plugins that make JOSM more powerful than ID Editor. So since you guys are all hopefully still in the preferences window, you're going to search for the plugin icon. If you want, I don't know if I should share my screen for this part, but it looks like that little puzzle piece. You're going to click on that, and the first plugin you're going to want to download is the Buildings tool plugin. That is, I didn't mention it as my favorite plugin, but it's definitely one of the most useful. So just search Buildings in the toolbox. Make sure you click, you check the buildings, like the little box next to the Buildings tool. And then you're also going to want to download a few more plugins. So the first is Utilize plugin 2. So just make sure you're checking that off. And then the Mapathoner plugin. And then click download list down below, and that will install those plugins onto your computer. All right, and then you're going to want to click OK and close out your preferences, and you should be all set up, and the plugin should appear at top. If for some reason it does ask you to restart your JOSM, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I get like problems with that. You can do that now, but after that point, the plugin should all be downloaded that you just put in. So this window right here is basically what JOSM is going to look like. There's a bunch of key tools, the map view, the edit tools in the main menu, and the shortcut toolbar. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see the information panel. If the information panel ever like disappears, you can always hit the tab button, and that should bring it right back up. I always like accidentally turn it off. Do you guys want us to share our screen, or Amy, do you want to share your screen and like maybe show what these tools are? Okay. yeah, the plugins you're going to want to download are Buildings, Mapathoner, and then there's also one, it's called, let me put the name in the chat because it's like, it's Utilis plugin too, but I'll put that in. But yeah, just download those. Those are the most important ones. Oh, Amy, you're muted.
Okay, it's at the top now. I'm going to download some random data just that we can look at some of the tools that are on the side here. The Zoom bar is like covering up some of it for me. I don't know if you guys can see it. But this is you can see it? Okay, I can't click on it, but we don't really need the top. So the left side is where all the plugins should be once you download them. And I think that here you can kind of expand these and see, again, the draw buildings is one of our favorites at Validation Hub to just quickly map buildings all with right angles. And then we have some other options along here where you can open lists of the buildings, or if you have the to-do list plugin like Noelle mentioned earlier. And then one of the main things that we use at the Hub is the validation tool, which I think I already have open, but if you click it on the left side, it'll open a little window where you can go in and run this tool, which I think we're going to talk about later, but it just highlights different errors that you might find in JOSM. And then just for some of the basic information panels on the right, we have the layers tab, which is where your data will pop up that you download from OSM, and you can just easily turn it on and off. And this is also where your imagery will pop up and you can reorder it to see, or like to put a different layer on top of one another. So you might need to do that. Sometimes my imagery like overrides the OSM data on JOSM. So you might have to play around with the errors to rearrange some of it. And then let me just move this so I can see my screen. So we also have tags. So when you click on something, this is where, let me expand this. This is where the tag for land use or buildings will pop up. So you can just really easily see what things are tagged as. And then to add a tag, you just press add. And then you can type in like building equals yes. But for example, that's a quick way to do that. Or if you want to tag roads, you can do it through this as well and just do highway equals primary or whatever you see fit. And then another one that is helpful sometimes for validation, if you want to see who did the edits, just maybe you want to like mention a specific person in your comment and say like, hey, I noticed that a lot of your buildings weren't square, like just make sure that you use the Q key, thank you. You can always like click here and then whatever you have highlighted, I guess I drew this, so you can see that this is that I'm the author. So you can like add that person in your comment. And then the validation results, I actually don't think it's going to come up with anything because there's not that much data here, but we'll go into that later. And then you can also see that I have some paint styles downloaded, including the missing maps one. And to download them, you click on this little preferences thing, and then they should just be right in this window. So you can click on them and click OK to download. So that'll be really helpful as we move on and start learning how to validate. Yeah, I think that's kind of the basics of JOSM for now. Hopefully everyone has had a chance to kind of like play around on their screen. And if you have any questions, you can let us know. Your JOSM interface might also look slightly different than mine because you can kind of configure it depending on what you're doing with it. But yeah, it should look something like this.
So I guess we should go back to the PowerPoint now. And now that you guys kind of have a feel for like what JOSM should look like and some of the capabilities, we'll get into how to launch a task. So If you want, like if you're familiar with JOSM already and you need a refresher, we can put the tasks that we're mapping today in the chat, right? I think that might be a good idea. And that way you can kind of follow along. There's one of the tasks. But first, you're going to want to make sure that JOSM is running on your computer. You all should already have it open. But of course, if for some reason you closed it, make sure you reopen it again. So you're going to want to go into the tasking manager. Today, we're using Teach OSM. And you're going to want to ensure that first you're going to go into the tasking manager, and then you're going to click the contribute button as you normally would do with like ID editor. But before you click map a task, you're going to want the screen's reloading, but there should be a little drop down that, should I just share my screen?
So sorry, Natalie, having issues. Yeah, feel free to share your screen.
I'll share my
so
screen.
Sorry about that.
You're good. Okay. So you guys should be able to see that now. So I can also switch to one of the tasks from today. All right, so here's one of the tasks we're looking at today. So normally this down here defaults to ID editor, especially if you've never used JOSM before. So if you go back, you're going to see like the option to click contribute. You're going to click contribute. You're going to switch from ID editor by clicking that little arrow button to JOSM. And then you should be able to click map a task. And if you want to reopen your JOSM window, it will load that data. So I'm not going to do that right now using this because my computer will slow down, but I'll continue with the PowerPoint. But in general, if you ever want to change your default editor to from ID to JOSM, if you go into settings, which I can actually show right now, here's my account. I go to settings, and then I scroll down, and instead of default editor being set to ID, I'll select JOSM. And now every time I open up Teach OSM, or if you do it in Hot Tasking Manager, it will automatically default to launching JOSM when you're going to open it up. So going to the next slide. So once you open up a task and you go back to your JOSM window, you may notice, kind of like in the beginning of this little screen capture, that there's no imagery behind it. It'll just be like a bunch, kind of what Amy was showing before, a bunch of like lines or circles, and that's the data. But without any imagery, it's kind of hard to see what it's entailing. So you're going to go into JOSM and you're going to click the top tab where it says imagery, and there should be an imagery drop down. And before you do this, you want to make sure you're checking out the tasking manager to see what the correct imagery to use today is. So in this example, they're saying Maxar. So you click imagery, you can select Maxar, and then it'll load it up, and it'll now appear on your layers tab on the right hand side. And there should be imagery behind your OSM data now. So moving on, you're going to, here's like a brief tutorial on the mapping buildings tool that Amy mentioned earlier. But basically it's that little button on the side that looks like, well, it literally looks like a few buildings, but you can also select the B button on your keyboard and that'll just activate the tool for you. So you're gonna want to click on the corner of a building and keep your mouse button pressed down and move the pointer along the longest edge of the building and release at the corner. And you can kind of adjust the shape of this as you feel is necessary based on what the building actually looks like. And the cool thing about this tool is that it'll automatically square and tag all your buildings. So you don't need to go through the extra steps of selecting the tool and then going into presets and typing in building and putting it in. You also don't need to press the Q key because it should square everything automatically. So that's one of the most efficient parts of this. Here's another thing you can do in the building tool. So if you are seeing a building that kind of pops out like this building does, you can draw the initial rectangle and then you can select the X key on your keyboard and double click to add a point at the edge of your rectangle where the building extends. So you can see they're doing it right there. You're double clicking there, and then you can drag the edge where you want to extend the footprint to make like an L or U or T-shaped building. And if you come across any circular buildings, you can always switch your building tool to circular by doing Alt-Z, or if you ever forget that, you go on the top of your screen. You can also select data, and then there's a drop down and you can click on set building shape to circle. But just make sure when you're done that you switch it back to rectangle by doing Alt-R, or if you're on a Mac, Control-R, and it'll switch it back for you, or you can go into that data tab. But this tool is nice because it'll trace the diameter of the building and it'll automatically create a perfect circle. So when you have like things like this, it's very useful. Here's more info on the building tool. This is basically drawing a courtyard because oftentimes it's really difficult if you just draw a square to kind of get rid of that middle space. So an easy way to do it is to select the S button and select the shape you've just traced, and then reselect the B. And so then you want to trace the remaining sides of the building and make sure they're all either overlapping or connecting to the initial building by hitting S again. And then once you're done with that, so you have a bunch of overlapping or connected buildings, you can select them all and hit Shift J, and that'll join them all into one building with a middle cutout. All right, so another tip, just like in ID editor, you want to make sure you're uploading frequently. You can do that by going into the top corner and hitting the up button, like the green arrow that points upwards, or you can do Control Shift up arrow, and then it'll basically prompt you to make sure that your data source is correct. You can add any hashtags you want to do, and anything else you feel like you need to add. There's also an option to click, I would like someone to review my edits. If you feel like that's necessary, then you can just click upload changes and it will upload it up to the back to the tasking manager. And when you're done with the task, and once you finish doing that, you can go back into the tasking manager and mark completely mapped or completely validated. I don't know, Amy, do you want to take over? I feel like I've been talking a lot.
Yeah, I
So
can
sing my voice.
I can go over how to map roads. I feel like roads are something that I end up mapping a lot while validating, because I don't know, I guess people just tend to forget to map them, or like in this picture we see it's kind of like a very faint track. So that's something that's kind of like left behind often. So you can activate the draw tool by pressing A on your keyboard, or on the left side of JOSM, there's also above the building tool, you can just select draw from there. So you can trace the road, and then you always want to tag it as with the key highway, as you can see here, and then you'll just do highway equals residential. Or I think we can send the tagging list, like the OSM road description, as to how to tag them. A common error I see is that a lot of people will tag roads that they don't know what to tag as unclassified, but unclassified doesn't mean, I don't know, it is actually like a way to indicate that the road is connecting different residential areas, and it actually entails like a bigger road. So we just want to go through all of those and make sure that everything is tagged correctly, but it's pretty easy to map roads on JOSM just because of the way the drawing tool works. And then also within the tools tab on the top of JOSM, you can find different tools like align nodes in a straight line. That way you can have your road be completely straight. So that's something that I use pretty often. And then you can also hit key if you select a node on a road, and it will split the road in half so you can work with it separately. So those are just two tools that I use, but you can find them all in JOSM under tools. Okay, so now we have land use, which is a similar thing. Oops, yeah, there you go. And you can, again, just use the drawing tool by selecting A, and then you can trace around the area. Usually I see residential areas, or a lot of times farmland or different fields are marked too. So the key is going to be land use, and then the value will be something like residential farmland, things like that. So yeah, that's another thing that you can map easily in JOSM. Okay, and then fixing buildings, this is more with validation. The most common thing that we see, I think everyone can agree on, is squaring buildings. So that's just something that you can do really quickly in JOSM by selecting the building and pressing Q, and that will automatically make 90-degree angles on all the sides of your shape. And then another thing that's really helpful is you can rotate the buildings by holding down Shift Control and then just pressing down, and it's kind of like hard to work with or like hard to show on the screen, but if you test it out yourself, you'll be able to see you can rotate it to go over the imagery better. And then you can also resize the building easily by doing Control Alt. That way you don't have to like adjust all the sides of the building separately. And then another thing that we see pretty often is that the buildings will be connected to each other. This is like on the right side, those two buildings are connected, but usually we want all the buildings to be separate because maybe it looks like they're right next to each other on the imagery, but most times in real life, the buildings aren't actually like glued to each other. So we want to disconnect those nodes, and you can do this by just highlighting the nodes or selecting them on JOSM and pressing G for unglue. That's how I remember that shortcut. So yeah, those are three common things that we use. Okay, so now we also have the imagery visibility, which is just how you can adjust the imagery in JOSM. Sometimes the imagery will be like not very saturated or not be colorful enough. Like, so you can go in to these settings and adjust the coloring and maybe make it more saturated or increase the gamma in order to make the colors kind of like pop out from each other so that you can more easily trace things. And this is especially helpful for when like the imagery is kind of low quality or maybe it's cloudy, so you can make things pop out more, especially when there's things like roofs having or will be like silver. So those, you can get them to stand out better by kind of adjusting the color of the imagery. And yeah, you can also just make sure that you compare different imagery sources, especially if you go into a task and something is completely not aligned with the imagery, just like you would do in ID editor. You can go to the imagery tab at the top of JOSM and just select different ones and compare them. I find it really easy to kind of like switch back and forth with imagery in JOSM too. So that's another really good tool that you can use, and you can just press the little eye to the left of the imagery to get it to kind of like pop up and go away. So yeah, this is just some other links that we have for JOSM, and we have a lot of documentation as well. So hopefully this was a good overview of it, and you've been following along and kind of getting used to just like the interface of JOSM. But if later you want to get a little more advanced and want to see kind of like different plugins and also a list of all the shortcuts, I think we can link that below too, because I know we kind of just threw a lot of like, oh, press G, press Q to do this. So we will send that out as well. But yeah, we have some different webinars here where you can learn more tools with JOSM and also see specifically how we validate on JOSM. I know we mentioned a couple things, but there are many, many more tools, some of which I don't even know. So it takes a while to like get used to everything on JOSM because there's so many different things you can do. And then we also have a Slack channel where you can go in and answer questions and just talk to different people in the OSM community. Oh, here it is.
Some shortcuts, yeah. But I know Dara mentioned in the chat that the PowerPoint's going to be sent out to everyone after the call ends. So you'll be able to access the links that way. Here's also a list of the plugins, but again, the main ones we were talking about were Buildings, Utilis plugin, and Mapathoner. Those are the most important ones. So
if I can hop in here real quick, Natalie and Amy, just to say that UNMappers directly after this event is holding a Mapathon, and they're going to be going over JOSM plugins. So if you really want to spend your whole day mapping and you're really interested in JOSM plugins, you can attend that event, and I'll share the link in the chat.
There you go, a whole day of mapping. But yeah, so these slides are from the humanitarian OpenStreetMap team. So thank you to them for letting us use them and also sending them out to you so you guys can follow along later and look back at them. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, you can let us know, and we can also start mapping the task and kind of answer things as they come up. And as you guys are using JOSM, again, feel free to just unmute yourself or type in the chat.
we could also, because I know we still have time, we could maybe like walk people through the validation documentation for JOSM. I don't know if that sounds like a good idea, Dara and Amy.
I'm sorry, my connection just cut out. Can you repeat that question? So sorry.
Maybe we could walk everyone through kind of the documentation for validating in JOSM, because this was kind of like an overview of JOSM in PowerPoint. If people are interested in learning more, like how to use JOSM for validation specifically.
Yeah, I think that would be good.
Okay, let me stop sharing. If you want to, I can open
Natalie,
that
I don't know
up.
if you hear me, my connection now, but yes, go, feel free to and.
Okay, I heard you.
Natalie, my internet connection is stable. You go ahead and do that. Yes, you go ahead and share your screen and give them a.
Right, she muted, but I got the idea. All right, so I'll share my screen. I'm going to share one of the documents that Ben briefly showed us before. Okay, can you guys see it?
Yeah.
So this is basically the Validator training document. It's available on the YouthMappers website under the projects tab. If you go to the Validation Hub and you scroll all the way down, you'll be able to find this. So it does give like an overview about like who the Validation Hub is, but then it kind of goes into our workflow. So as far as validating goes, we're looking for three main things. That is spatial accuracy, tagging accuracy, and completeness. So those are the three things you keep in mind. I mean, you guys can read it there, what they are, but basically spatial accuracy is making sure features are correct, there's nothing like overlapping, and buildings are squared. Tagging accuracy is making sure things are tagged appropriately and as per the instructions. And completeness is making sure that everything mapped is kind of following the instructions as well. So missing maps actually has like a really nice workflow documentation available on their website. But if you open up the validator training document, you'll be able to access that. I can like open it up in the new tab, but it is quite long, so I'm not going to go through that. It's like 24 pages. But our document is kind of like almost like a cheat sheet, kind of gives you an overview of like the key elements and what you're going to be doing when you're validating. So first, of course, you should be doing this when you're mapping as well, but you just want to make sure you're very familiar with the project instructions, understanding what should have been mapped initially, what imagery should have been used, and kind of what Wikipedia, wiki links, and stuff like that, just so you can ensure that everything's being done correctly. So once you like have gone over that, then you're ready to go in and load in your data and start validating. So the first step is going to be to run the validation tool in JOSM once the data is loaded. So that is that blue check mark on the right-hand side if you turn it on. Amy showed it earlier, that window, but you're gonna check that blue check mark, and then what it'll do is it will basically populate with a list of any issues that it's finding. After I go through this, I think me or Amy could maybe like run through one of the tasks we have, maybe not one of the tasks for today, but a task that we've been working on and validating just to show an example. And basically it'll populate with any issues that it finds on its own. This is really helpful because it kind of sets you up for the rest of the workflow. And so once you click the validation button, oh, you also want to make sure that you're not currently selecting any features, because then it'll just validate that one feature, which is not what you want to see. You want to make sure nothing's selected. So it'll validate the whole entire square. So one warning you can ignore is unnamed ways, because most of the time we don't know the name of roads, especially because we are mapping remotely. So unless you have like familiarity with a local area, just ignore that. There's not really any reason to be adding like any names. And but with any other issues, in order to kind of check out those issues, so it'll notify you if there's like any overlapping buildings, you can right click on the problem that's listed in the little validation window and click zoom to problem, and that'll zoom in on it, and you'll be able to see what the problem is and fix it accordingly. Sometimes it just means you have to move a building off of another building. Sometimes it means something's not tagged. So lots of different things that it'll pick out, and it'll kind of notify you and tell you to take care of. So once you're done doing that, you kind of run through the list. And I normally, and this documentation says to run it again just to make sure there's anything you didn't miss or no new issues that you caused when you're fixing things. And also it says, remember that you're reviewing the data for tags as requested in the instructions. So if the instructions are saying that you want to be tagging things a specific way, please make sure you're doing that kind of as you're going through the task and visually and manually using the tool, because the validation tool doesn't always pick up on tagging issues. It does sometimes, kind of depends on what it is. So as the validator, your job is to make sure that things are tagged appropriately. So once all the issues mentioned in the validation tool are addressed, the box will be clear and then you'll have no more. So after you do that, you're going to want to either visually check for any features that are not traced. I like to do this first, especially if it's an area that's really has like a lot missing and hasn't been touched in a while. And I'll kind of go in and like map those features myself if there's things that are missing. But generally, if you're on the validation tool, it doesn't do those things. It just takes care of like errors that are like within the computer or within like tagging that it has a list of. It's not visually checking against the background imagery. So you're going to want to make sure you're checking for any features that aren't traced, positional accuracy, make sure things are lining up with the imagery, and that features are mapped in the correct orientation. So once you're doing that, you just want to be kind of fixing things as you see them. And once again, you're going to want to like run the validation tool again once you're done doing everything, just to make sure that you don't make any mistakes in the process. So this has more like an in-depth like workflow on how to do that. But one thing to keep in mind is to try and keep the edits that other mappers have made in place. So you don't want to be like deleting things all crazy. Sometimes it can be a little frustrating when there are some things that you like can clearly see are not there, but you do want to generally kind of go with what you see and try and keep those edits in the data set as much as possible. Of course, like if someone like added a tree like that, or like a random like point and there's nothing around and it's not tagged, you can delete that and either make a note of it in the comment, or if it's like something super minor, I don't always make a note of it, kind of at your discrepancy, depending on like what it is. Because sometimes people just accidentally put things in like when they're on their computer. But yeah, trying to see what else. There's a lot in here. I don't want to like read through everything. Because we'll also have this online for you guys to look at.
And Natalie, there's a couple of questions in the chat that I think are
Oh.
addressing some of the things you're going over. So I'll read those aloud. So first we have, if two buildings are connected to each other, can we map them sharing one line as a boundary of both buildings?
So sorry, I'm just reading it. If two buildings are connected.
I would say usually, well, yes, if they are actually connected and you can tell by the imagery that they are, but we want to be kind of cautious with that because a lot of times in the tasks, it'll say like don't overlap or connect buildings. Since a lot of times in the imagery, it might look like they're right next to each other and connected, but like in real life on the ground, they are actually separate. It's just kind of like how it appears from above. So sorry, that's not a good answer, but I guess yes, if you are pretty sure that they are actually connected, but I guess exercise caution because in general, we want to map things separately. Sorry if that isn't a straight up answer, but it's a lot of things in validation is kind of just like doing your best and like using your knowledge from before to kind of like just judge yourself like what you think is actually mapped.
Yeah, you need to make a lot of judgment calls sometimes because sometimes things are not specifically like addressed in instructions and things can go either way. So it's very much based on like what you can visually see and what seems appropriate for like the task.
And then
And
the
there's-
second question.
Yep, go ahead, Amy.
Oh, thanks. Is how do you know when tags are used appropriately when tasks are from an unknown site?
So I was a little confused by this question. I'm assuming you're referring to when you're like validating an area that you've never been to. So that's why it's unknown. But most of the time in the instructions, it will tell you how you're supposed to be tagging certain things. So say, for example, it's telling you you're going to want to map all the roads. And it's going to be like, refer to this wiki link and use this as kind of reference for tagging things. So in that context, you're going to want to be comparing to what the instructions say. Of course, we do come across tasks sometimes that don't have very like in-depth instructions, so that does make things a little more difficult. I'd say when there's literally no instruction except map buildings, map roads, or sometimes there's even less than that, doesn't even say anything, then kind of use your own discretion to see if things are appropriate or not. In general, buildings should only be tagged as buildings. You shouldn't be tagging things as like schools or like residential or like houses and stuff, or like office buildings and stuff like that, unless you have like personal knowledge, because it is really hard most of the time to tell from satellite imagery what something actually is. So buildings should just be getting the building tag, I'd say about 98% of the time. Obviously, if that's different, the instructions will normally specify, but if not, just generally tag it as buildings. With roads, it depends on the task. Sometimes they'll point you in the direction of a wiki. They'll tell you you only want to be mapping certain types of roads. And if it's telling you only map certain types of roads, only map those roads and tag those appropriately. So when you're validating, you kind of want to make sure that like the tags are based on that. We do kind of defer sometimes, I feel like, to that wiki link we sent because it's not like the best tagging guide out there, but it does help with showing you the tags for certain roads and it has like satellite imagery to compare against. I don't know if Amy, you have anything to add.
Yeah, I feel like I usually default to that if the task doesn't say anything else, because that's a pretty standardized way of doing it. And yeah, you can assume that that'll be close enough for whatever the task wanted you to do. And yeah, you can type in the chat or unmute if you have any other questions.
Yeah. So I'm gonna kind of skip over the rest of this. I'll just get to like the key points. So once you're done making sure everything's traced and everything's corrected, and you're gonna run the validation tool one last time, if everything seems all good to go, then you're gonna make sure that you upload all that data to OSM for one final time. You're going to go back into the tasking manager, and you're gonna, we generally try and write like encouraging comments to contributors of the task to thank them for their efforts. So if you go to our website, we have some lists of some comments we like to leave for people. This basically ensures that people like know that we're encouraging them to come back and map again and kind of giving constructive criticism because like Tara mentioned in the beginning, we don't build maps, we build mappers, which I think is really true when you're doing validation because a lot of times you'll be validating things and a lot of the some things you're validating are from brand new mappers and they may not have had a lot of guidance early on in the process. So sending them these notes and kind of like encouraging them to keep going, giving them helpful tips, really ensure that they'll keep coming back and be doing so in like a meaningful way and they're improving their OSM skills. So after you do that, you're gonna click mark as valid in the tasking manager or update. Well, I think now it's just all marked as valid. I think this is a little outdated, but you're just gonna make sure like, is this task completely mapped or is it completely, has it been validated? And you're gonna click a yes and click submit and then that task will be done and you'll be all set. However, if you do go into a task and you realize that most of the task is not mapped and it's a lot and it seems to be a pretty active task, then you're going to want to go ahead and close that task out and mark as invalid in the tasking manager or not completely mapped. And that make sure you leave a note when you do this and tag the people who initially mapped it. That way, hopefully they'll go back and do it continue the mapping. And that'll kind of set its status back over to more mapping needed. So other people can go in and now do more mapping in it. So this is pretty important, especially if you're mapping, like you're validating a really active task. When you're validating a task that kind of has been not touched in a couple months or years, you're going to want to try and fix those things yourself and map them yourself. But if it's a pretty active task, most of the time you do want to mark as invalid and encourage people to go in and fix those. Yeah, these are some tips. Here's a little like diagram that kind of shows our workflow. So if you see a square with lots of problems, you're gonna kind of be deciding if you're gonna fix it yourself or you're gonna kind of send it back to the mapper. So if it's high priority, you're obviously going to fix it yourself because that's something important and you want to get done. But if it's medium or low priority, you're going to kind of refer to how long ago the task was, the score has been edited. So if it's over a month, generally you're going to send it, you're not going to send it back, you're going to fix that yourself. But if it's less than a month old, you're going to investigate to see how active the user is. If they seem to be a new mapper and maybe they just like attended one Mapathon and they're not a regular user, then you'll try and fix it yourself. But if they have been mapping a lot recently or working on multiple tasks, you're going to send it back to them and ask them to fix it. Yeah, so that's basically the documentation. Again, it's available on the website, and the missing maps documentation is also really thorough in explaining this. Our training documentation is kind of the key things you want to keep in mind, but definitely check both of them out. So I'm going to stop sharing now. I don't know if anyone has any more questions. How's everyone feeling in terms of validating? or just draw some familiarity. I think something to mention is if you guys, this is like the first time you're ever seeing JOSM, don't go right into validating. You kind of want to get familiar with mapping using JOSM first, because it is a little bit of like a switch from a D editor if you're only familiar with that. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if Amy, you have any other points to make.
Well, it looks like too on the tasks that we have that there are a lot of squares available now for validation that maybe they've mapped in the other room. So that's kind of cool if anyone wants to, is like feeling comfortable enough to start validating.
Yeah.
Okay, well then
No,
I'll
I
ask.
just started.
I'll ask.
Oh, JOSM makes.
Go ahead. Indapule asked.
I'm just reading someone in the chat.
Yeah, JOSM makes digitizing buildings a little easier. Nice.
100%.
And
Like the best part about it, honestly.
I'll ask a novice question here. So what level of mapping do you have to be at, as far as like, don't you have to get a tight, like you have to be more of an advanced mapper in order to validate on the tasking manager, or how do you reach that level to where you're able to be a validator?
So I know when we started working for the Validation Hub, we kind of needed to get to an intermediate level in order to do any sort of validation. The task we're doing today actually does say, if you scroll down onto teams and permissions, that all users can validate, that there's not really any level restrictions. However, some tasks you will find do have restrictions either to intermediate or advanced mappers, or sometimes like only members like the hot validation team can validate it. It honestly is a matter of kind of checking the restrictions before you start. Obviously, if you don't meet those restrictions, it just won't let you. It'll be like you don't meet the permissions necessary. But in general, it's good to have intermediate level skills, and even if you're intermediate and you're familiar only with ID editor, then you definitely want to get like a good amount of change sets in with JOSM, just so you can get familiar with the platform, because it is a bit of a switch.
And then how you get to intermediate or advanced level is it's based on the number of change sets that you make overall in OSM. So every time you upload a set of edits, that counts as one. I believe it's 250 to get to intermediate and 500 for advanced, which sounds like a lot, but if you map fairly regularly, it's actually like pretty easy to get to. And if you also just save your edits frequently so that you don't lose them, then yeah, you'll get to that number pretty fast.
Okay, I think it may be helpful, Natalie, you were sharing about the aerial imagery and choosing the imagery in the chat. Maybe if you can clarify that for everyone right now, that would be helpful.
Yeah. So it seemed like we were using Bing. Obviously this task didn't seem, well, at least the one I was doing, which is number 47, didn't seem to have any like clear instructions. But generally, if there aren't clear instructions and you're mapping an area that has been mapped already, or even if there are clear instructions, say like the instructions say to use Maxar, but you're mapping an area and the user clearly used like Bing to map that whole area, generally I would continue with what was like what someone else was already using it with, and just like make sure you make a note of that when you're submitting the task at the end, just so other users know or like validators know, because sometimes you will come across tasks where like the Bing and the Maxar imagery are super different, and kind of you're going to have to use your own discretion to decide what works best, especially if it wasn't specified. But if it was, if like there's already buildings on there, that kind of gives you a hint as to what to continue to work with. I don't know if that makes sense. Sorry, that's just like one a lot of ways. But does anyone else have thoughts on that? Any other hub members?
I'll chime in here. That's all right. Let me actually turn on my camera there. Yeah, I know oftentimes, as Natalie was saying, you'll find areas that have already been mapped using some imagery that may be different from what is specified, or like in our case, the imagery isn't specified. So I've been mapping in Bing because the imagery is pretty clear and it worked great in one area, pretty good in another area. But when I was comparing it to Maxar, I saw that Maxar imagery appeared to be newer. But all the previous work that was done was lining up with Bing and not Maxar. So that's why I was working with Bing to flesh out this task that I'm currently working on to make sure all the features that are there from the more recent imagery, I'd have to move, offset that imagery to match the existing features before I continue tracing using the updated imagery, which I think was mentioned earlier about offset. So basically, you have to move the imagery to match the features that currently exist, and then you continue mapping to make sure you get all the features that are on the ground. And again, sometimes it's a bit of a guessing game of which imagery is most recent, but typically with a lot of development, you can tell the whole entire forest there, one imagery, and the next one has a series of buildings, then typically the buildings are going to be, the imagery with the buildings are going to be the more recent. If that makes sense. If you have any questions, please just post in the chat.
Okay, morning everybody. Thank you very much. I have a question for a JOSM Advanced Editor. Can you explain for me because why you use to use JOSM explain? My English is no good.
We're understanding you well, Nassim. So thank
Okay.
you. So
Okay.
yeah. So you're wanting to know why we used the JOSM editor. So maybe
Yeah.
Natalie or Amy, if you can answer that, that'd be helpful. Thank you, Nassim.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, thanks for your question. I think in general, JOSM makes it a lot easier to do kind of like mass edits. For example, you can highlight all of the buildings and square them all at once instead of going through each one individually. And it also just allows you to see some things more easily than you could in ID editor. Like you can see who made the edit before. You can more easily adjust the imagery and things like that. I don't know if Natalie, you have anything to add on. Also with the plugins, like the building plugin makes it a lot easier to just quickly draw buildings too.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.